mamas. We call the police mamas. If a mama comes by, if it's just a normal patrol, if they're just cruising down the road normally, don't alert me because it's not a problem. But if they're speeding or they got lights on, then let me know immediately, And then once it happens, go home, leave, just get out.
The Treehouse, the story Netflix couldn't tell. Part 1 of 6.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Today we have with us two really special guests. I've been so excited to record this. We have Shawn and Stephen. Welcome, gentlemen. I wish we had you here in the studio with us, but nonetheless, I'm grateful to see you on screen anyway. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's get started a little bit with some general introductions. Shawn, can I start with you and tell us who you are and your role in this? Because what we're going to talk about today is the Treehouse, clearly a book that Stephen published, and there was a Netflix documentary, How to Rob a Bank, that followed, and today we want to go deeper. But Shawn, tell us a little bit about you and your career and what your involvement in this case was, just from a 36,000-foot view.
Sure. So, Shawn Johnson, I'm a retired FBI agent. I was with the FBI for 29 years.
Oh, wow.
Originally, my first office assignment was Seattle, where this all occurred. I was out there for 11 years, from 87 until 98. After this, I transferred to Milwaukee Division. I was in the Madison Resident Agency for 7 years. Through my career, 18 years in the field, I worked a variety of different programs, from violent crime to national security investigations. Following my time in Madison, I transferred to the FBI Academy, where I taught new agents for 6 years in counterterrorism and criminal investigations, also human intelligence training. And then following that, my last 5 years at the Bureau, I was working with the Director of Intelligence, called the DI, human operations throughout the country, and training new agents on how to do their human operations. Again, I've been retired now for 10 years, and during my time in Seattle, when this case occurred, I was assigned as the case agent for the majority of the time of the 4.5 years that these robberies were occurring. So I was the lead investigator for that for the FBI. And again, this was a very interesting experience. And, Stephen and I have now met up after all these years. Last time I saw Stephen was 1997. So it's been good to get back together, and we're looking forward to sharing our story.
Absolutely. And that getting back together is a unique part of the story, too, that we'll touch on. So I appreciate that. Well, Stephen, the author of The Treehouse, a book that we're going to recommend, and we can continue to talk about it throughout this and make sure people know where to get a copy of it. But tell us a little bit about you and where you're going to be in this story that's going to be told today.
Well, this story, above and beyond the actual participation and camaraderie that I had with Scott Scurlock, a.k.a. Hollywood. We worked bank robberies together for 4.5 years. But before that, my history spans back. I lived in Europe for 15 years. I was a sculptor, furniture designer, and I lived in various countries in Europe and exhibited there, commissions and so on. And then once I returned to the States in the early 80s and set up studio outside of Washington, D.C., and continued doing what I was doing, exhibiting furniture design, furniture making, and exhibitions in sculpture, and various other things. And at one point, Scott Scurlock, whom is Hollywood, he and I, when we were growing up, when I was in college before I left for Europe, I was studying in Virginia, and he was younger than I was. I didn't really know him, but my brother, who was close friends with him, and they evolved and had their own, and I left for Europe, and they were doing what they were doing. He was in Hawaii, Scott was in Hawaii. And at some point when I returned back to the States, my brother asked if I would be interested in flying out to Washington. This is where Scott was living, and helping him with some construction on a project he had. And I said, yeah. And at that point, that's when Scott and I met each other as adults, and we worked very well together and got along well. And, this was before his bank robbery. And, I returned, and then we just kept in contact, and then one thing grew after another. And I mean, the story is complicated in a certain sense because it evolved gradually, and it didn't start with bank robbery. It started with our both mutual working together in construction and so on and so forth, and different projects we had. But as the book paraphrases, in which the Netflix also exposed, was before he started getting in bank robbery, he was a prolific chemist, and he produced crystal meth long before crystal meth ever really took hold in America as it did. He was one of the founders of it. And he did this for a number of years until the point came in his life that the person that he did the business with was one person. He wasn't like a cartel or anything. He just cooked, got rid of it, and made his money that way because he had a person who would actually do all of the dealing and financials up and down the coast, the West Coast. And at some point, he was murdered in Olympia, Washington, and that's when Scott quit. And that transition from there, from doing that, because he never really liked the drug world, he didn't like the culture of it and what it did to people. It was just not, but he was very scientific. He was like Heisenberg in real life, not mythical Heisenberg, but the real. And he was fanatical about precision and about purity and about methodology and secrecy and, chain of command. He was very professional like that. But this thing, struck him very hard because this guy was a very intimate professional. They didn't hang out together. They only dealt with each other clandestinely, however it was set up. And anyway, he was murdered. And Scott was off in somewhere in the Seychelles Islands or something vacationing. And somehow I found out before he did. And I communicated with him. I forget how we did that because that was before cell phones, obviously. But somehow I communicated, and that sort of startled him. And he returned to Olympia. And that's when he started, investigating and wanting to rob banks. He had told me as a young boy he always wanted to rob banks. And you have to understand, he was college educated. He was studying at Evergreen College before, not med school, but he was studying to be a doctor, but he just didn't like the culture, the whole political aspect of all that it encumbered to become a doctor and so forth. And he was a maverick in his own sense, a very unique man, and he wanted life on his terms, and he made it that way so he could. But he was a very kind person, if that makes sense. He was not aggressive. He was very generous with people. His time, physical time as far as working, helping people for nothing. And but then at that point, I was living in Chicago, and he'd been in and out of Chicago. We had a couple projects we were working on there, and he came to me, and which is in the book. You have to read the book at the opening of how the book, begins, and how I left Chicago and then came out to Olympia, and he wanted me to, help him with the prosthetic masks that were used, and building his home, redoing his home and his treehouse. And I'd been out to his property many times, helped him on the treehouse and so forth. So, I mean, that's my kind of history to get into why I robbed banks.
Sure.
It was nothing that I had, aspired to do, but because of our connection and the trust we had in one another and how well we worked together, it just organically came about. And yeah, I guess philosophically, would I have ever done that? No, I would have never gone out and robbed banks on my own, but it was his passion and investigation that he took. I mean, he studied this long before he would study forensic cases and study the FBI. He always loved Mossad, FBI, CIA. He studied journals. That was his That was who he was. His mind, it worked on that. He was not on this. He was a person that not on this plane. Does that make sense to you? It was just very unique.
It does.
And
When you talked about him wanting to rob banks since he was younger, any idea what the influences might have been that kind of directed him into that? Because I'm getting the feel that he liked that the sexy part of law enforcement, right? The maybe the back office part. But can you recall him ever talking about why at a young age he got interested in it?
I mean, I could be digging into my own imagination, but I believe we were discussing that. And he said, yeah, just insurance companies and all of that. He always felt in the rapacious and, wanting to get, but as a kid, I don't know if you're familiar with the old program. I think it was called It Takes a Thief.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, it was a very romantic kind of slick. This guy could go in and get jewelry stores and banks and all of this. And he was a very cool guy. He wasn't like a guy going in with guns and shooting people up and all that. And that kind of, I guess, that character inspired him. And he spoke about that. There was no reason why banks never did anything to him. I mean, he never stole, in his life as a young kid or anything. And in fact, his father was a minister, a preacher.
Okay.
And, so that's kind of, yeah, I can't really tell you because I didn't know him, but I mean, just offhanded conversations we had. And he just loved the fact that, that was there to be done. And it was a challenge. Does that make sense? I mean, if the money weren't there, okay, great. He's not going to become an anarchist just because he wants some idealistic, nonsensical reason to become an anarchist. It's not that. But it was almost as if it was a show that, you guys think you have it right, but I got it more right. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? It was a challenge.
Almost like a competitiveness to it, maybe. Yeah.
Very competitive. But you have to understand at the same time, Scott had a deep respect and connection to FBI and, like CIA. And I mean, he really studied Mossad. He loved Mossad a lot. But the FBI, he studied them and he respected them and he feared them. The SPD, the police, were predictable. As I was telling Shawn, it was not a failure on their part. It's just that they're programmable. They do what they do. They have their roots. They have the routines. They have that. And once you figure it out and you're able to monitor them and surveillance them and, get their timings and all that, and the responses, what they do and what they won't do, it becomes, I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's pretty much foolproof. Whereas the FBI was a silent monster in the back. And
behind the scenes.
And he respected that. And we both did. We even honored the Seattle police because they had no way of knowing. It was like, it was like Hitler's blitzkrieg, you kind of, what day are you coming? And Shawn and I have spoken about this often, we mix things up just like he was mixing things up on us without us knowing. And, you can't predict 100%, but Shawn being who he is on this investigation, from what I've learned since we've come together, I mean, I shook my head sometimes. He was a block away from us on our getaways, and stuff. I just go, you can't. And this was, if Scott would have known this, he would have loved it. It would have been, oh, okay, he's that close. Okay, we got something for you next time. Or, what I mean? That was what it inspired him. The closer he came to it, the closer he came to the ultimate challenge or the ultimate risk, it inspired him more,
It's interesting reading Stephen's book because, like I said, last time I'd spoken to him was during the plea agreement and the proffer back in '97. And when I read the book last year, there's so many things in that book that I didn't know either. It was just amazing facts and what was occurring behind the scenes with them that I had no clue of. And we've shared stories about some of the things we were doing at the time that they didn't know. So each party was involved in this, but, on opposite sides. But it was just interesting, again, reading Stephen's book, how much was behind the scenes that I didn't know about, that I was trying to find out during that period of time. Some I did, some I didn't, but it was very enlightening after reading his book.
Yeah, and I have to paraphrase this with the way I wrote the book. It's in the first person, and it's not written with the intent of being a true crime novel in that sense. It unfolds true crime, but it's a voyage. It's a psychological voyage between people. And I mean, I did this in the first year and a half of prison, and I did it in my cell, with a typewriter and total, real isolation where I could, and everything was still living in me viscerally. I mean, mentally and viscerally. I could remember dialogues that Scott and I would have and other people would have, encounters, and it's all of that comes out in the well, this book, it comes out. There's a lot more that I left out that I've edited out just because it's just too big. But the book is more of a, I mean, there's philosophical things in it. There's political, reflections of a situation that come about. And like, for example, I would be sitting in the car monitoring Scott while he's in the bank. And in those days, you had newspapers, and that was part of my camouflage. I would open my newspaper as I'm parked on the side of the street, acting like normal Joe Blow reading. And there's a article of Clinton who just got involved in one of his nefarious events that was taking place. And so I will go, as I'm in the book, I may reflect onto that and saying, yes, while we're doing this, Clinton is doing this, or some other. You see what I'm saying? It was like a mirroring of the situation at the time.
Yeah. In reading the book too, like I said, some of the things that were very enlightening to me, I was amazed how much detail that Stephen put in the book, as far as just down to the conversations that he had with Stephen, with Scott, and also our interaction, following the last robbery, and our interviews we did together for 4 days in total. And I was just like, I'm trying to think now, this was 30 some years ago, right? And as he said, he wrote that book the first year and a half he was in the federal prison. But it was just, for me, it kind of brought back a lot of memories that I had forgotten about.
But the beauty of it was, I mean, the way I compose the book is I go in and out of time. The book begins at the end of the shootout, at the last. Mm-hmm. So you don't know what's really going on.
Right.
And then it unfolds a little by little. You kind of understand something was going on. And then I'm in county jail and go through the legal ramifications. And there's characters in the county jail that I, involve, just. And then basically, once we get to the proffering, the 4 days of proffering with Shawn and his partner, that's when the book opens up, because he begins in the very beginning. How did Scott and I meet? And I'm writing all of this down in the book, our dialogue and his questions back and forth. And then he'll ask about the first bank robbery. And my whole, as I said, long before it gets to that point of the proffering, in county jail, there was a character that I, became friends. You don't become friends like that, but, somebody you could talk to, you know what I mean? And, he was a veteran criminal, so he kind of knew the game between the police. This is all new to me. I mean, this is the first time I've ever been arrested. I know, this is a whole new world. I just went from daylight to some new world that I have no ability to navigate. So he's telling me this and that. And, when you talk to the feds, don't ever give them anything for free. They're always going to give you something back. And all of these things are going through my head. But the one thing that motivated me most is because from the very beginning, they blamed us as ambushing the police when it was the opposite. The Seattle police, with the head of Mike McGann, who was the shooter, and started shooting into our van. And, as I've told my lawyer and I told Shawn, I said, I didn't really have a problem. We knew that they would be doing this, the SPD, not the FBI, but we knew the SPD because, after 4.5 years of humiliation and embarrassment, it only stands to reason that the only way they could get us was to try to kill us. And that's in fact what he tried to do, was to kill us. He just started shooting randomly into the back of the van. And my problem is that, okay, they're going to play this game. I mean, it's not that I was trying to be innocent. I mean, it's not even a question. That it is what it is. But don't exaggerate. Why not say we had nuclear bombs? You could have told us if they had nuclear bombs in the van, and get us on that, get us on a terrorist thing, whatever. It just became so ridiculous. And okay, you're going to play that game with me, legal game, to get, pound on more and more time. Well, I can play it too. And since I was the lone survivor, after that, after everything unfolded, Scott, committed suicide. So I'm the last person, and I was the only one. Scott and I did everything together. We knew everything. We knew what we did, how we did it, all the clandestine stuff that we did over those years. So I had everything in our hand. And when we would leave evidence for the FBI, my whole philosophy was, when I think or I know that they know something about what question they're asking me, I always tell the truth. But when I know they don't have any idea of what happened or who was or what this was or what I did, then I lie. I make it benefiting me. In other words, I tried to make myself look as lame as possible. And about the money, about everything. And so that in the book, you see me talking in real life, but then when I'm being interrogated from Shawn and his partner, I could be lying. And then after he goes through his questions, then I flip back in time to that first bank robbery. And then then the reader sees exactly what really happened. Do you see what I'm saying?
I love it. And you may not have wrote a true crime book, but it's straight up in the true crime world. And I think that
you can go out and rob a bank. If you have the guts to do it with the knowledge you have in there, you can go rob a bank.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I used to joke that when I worked in the homicide unit that we could probably teach somebody how to kill somebody and get away with it. We would never do that. But so it was kind of that. But again, I think especially our audience that pays attention to us will be interested in your book because of that authenticity. And it's funny when you were talking about how you would stage up your questions based on what Shawn asked you and whether you thought he knew what he was talking about. That's an interesting perspective because from the interviewer side, from law enforcement, we're always kind of watching for that. So it's neat to hear somebody acknowledge that picking and choosing when you were going to come forward with the truth or not. When you sat down with Shawn the first time, and this is for Shawn and you, did either of you feel like the initiating part of a rapport was building, or was it straight up responding to the proffer and trying to make the deal? What do you think was happening in that first conversation?
Well, I mean, for me, and I think early on when we met that first day for the first interview, I told Mark and I told Stephen that, this is nothing personal. This is strictly professional. I'm not judging you for what you did. I just want to know, just the facts, Bam, right? And at the time, right after the last robbery, there's a lot of holes that we had in our investigation, suspicions that other robberies had occurred that we weren't quite sure were connected to Scott and his companions. So it was interesting to go through that. But, we were focusing for the proffer. It was strictly charges related, of course, to the last robbery, that Thanksgiving Eve. So I started off with both these guys from day one, where they grew up, their parents, their siblings, and all the way through the point when Stephen mentioned about how they met Scott, how Scott transitioned from the crystal meth to actually deciding to rob banks, and, the planning behind that and who was involved. Stephen mentioned about us recovering some of the vehicles throughout the course of the investigation, some of them that were left behind on purpose, tracing that information back, where'd you buy the car, who bought the cars, all those things that were somewhat unknown at the time. And, but again, my purpose in that was to, make sure the plea agreement and the proffer were set in stone, that we could proceed with the sentencing, prosecution of the sentencing. But going back to Stephen's book, and I'll say this, a lot of the robberies that I thought were maybe conducted solely by Scott, I realized that, Stephen was involved in a lot more than I knew at the time, especially after reading the book. But that was one of the enlightening, things I found out was, oh my God, he was in this one and this one and this one.
Yeah, I mean, I was in all of them except the first one. Yeah. Yeah.
So that alone was, not shocking, but just, wow, that's after all these years. And now the whole story somewhat changes from my perspective.
I mean, for me, I knew exactly the robbery in which it was provable that there was someone outside monitoring the police.
And we knew that.
And so the first time that I had to make a call to Scott when he was in the bank, that was the first time I admitted to a bank robbery. I don't know how many before that. I mean, it's in the book, but you know what I mean? And so I never told them I was involved. I went out to build Scott's house. I don't know. He did what he did. He was, I made stories up as I went, and it's all in the book, but, I knew that moment was going to come that, and what was beautiful was that, when they came, his partner, I was waiting for that moment for those days. I was waiting for it to see what the response of the FBI was going to be in the interrogation and the proffering. And, when they said, okay, you were there, and then his partner, Dave, said, well, how much money did you get? And I don't know what the robbery was. Maybe it was 150,000 or something. Whatever that bank was, I can't remember now, and he said, well, how much money did you get? And I go, well, I got $5,000. And he jumps up on the table, $5,000.
That's it?
You would do all that for $5,000? And I go, what? I didn't do anything. I was sitting in a car. What am I supposed to? I mean, why would he give me? I mean, he was the one. I didn't have any risk or anything like that. And all the way until the very end of the last robbery did I say I got more than $5,000. So It was stupid. But I wanted to do it because I didn't want to have restitution. I didn't want to have to pay all these millions of dollars in restitution.
And I told Stephen, if I was in your shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. Minimize your culpability, right?
Right.
I'll admit, but I'm not leading to this unless you have something to show me that I actually was, a participant in it. So, it was kind of a back and forth, game to some degree.
Yeah. And, in the whole thing, we protected, at least I did. I protected all the side characters that we hired throughout the years to do certain things, they were never involved in the level that we created, but we needed a watcher, or we needed a car, or we needed it. For example, the one woman, Mustang, who's in the book, she was a very close colleague of ours, and we had hired her to work in the C First Bank, and she worked in there for a year, and she gave us all this forensic protocol and what they do when they get robbed, security procedures and all that. So we had all those pamphlets, and we studied that and saw it, and and she would give us heads up when deliveries was coming and stuff like that. So, she was there, and she was there for other sitting in a corner, a lot of times, depending on the geography of where the bank was and how the police would do their routine pass-bys, patrols. Sometimes I couldn't cover. It could have been 2 entrances and exits on this one bank. So we would have to hire somebody to sit at another location on a street that I couldn't visually watch, And so we would pay her, and we had other people we paid to do that too. But they were never brought up. Everything was just.
Were you ever afraid at any point with hiring on these extras that you couldn't trust them, or did you pretty well feel like you could?
No, because the people. If you knew Scott, if you knew this personality, Scott supplied psychologically, and this gets back to the book called The Treehouse. The Treehouse was this epic sanctuary in the middle of a forest in Olympia, 19 acres. And during the 1990s, Evergreen Olympia was, progressive hippies, all the progressive kinds of people. And this treehouse was just, to be there, it was something that was magical. It was something not of this world. And to be honest with you, the title of the book, why I call it that, is because everything rotated around the treehouse. Everything that was created, crystal meth, the bank robbery. Without the treehouse, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, and the first time I heard about the treehouse was the evening of the last robbery when I interviewed Stephen and Mark in the hospital. And I think Stephen said he lives in the world's biggest treehouse or something like that. And I'm looking at the guy thinking, maybe he's got too much pain medication in it or something. World's biggest treehouse. And he said, well, you'll see when you get there. You'll see when you get there. And of course, the next morning, Thanksgiving Day, when we did the search warrant and tried to effect an arrest warrant at Scott, walking back in those woods and then seeing this structure built on these 7-cedar trees, it was surrealistic. He was right. It was his treehouse. And of course, the house in the front and the barn, the makeup studio was the other things. But going back from the woods to this treehouse, it was exactly what he described. And the previous night, I'm thinking, what? Now, what's this all about?
So, getting back to your question, first of all, one of the other persons who was on the Netflix, he was a man, and he spoke about Scott. I don't know if his name was Alban. Lived nearby Scott's place. He had his own place in the forest as well. And he used an old musician an LA musician, a drummer, famous, it's called Love, I guess, was the name of the band back in the day. But, he was very close to Scott, and he knew what was going on. He was probably the one that knew most of what was going on with us, but he was just solid gold. And we would say, you interested in making $5,000? So we'd pay him $5,000 to sit on the corner, gave him a radio walkie-talkie that was only connected to me, not to Scott in the bank. And, if mamas, we call the police mamas, if a mama comes by, if it's just a normal patrol, if they're just cruising down the road normally, don't alert me because it's not a problem. But if they're speeding or they got lights on, then you let me know immediately, And then once it happens, go home, leave, just get out. They didn't care. There's no idealism as far as protecting bank. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of maybe it's an American myth or something that's in our psyche, in our cultural psyche, that banks have always been, they're not bad. I don't mean that. I personally, we all use banks. It is what it is. But
well, I think folks have a perception of what a bank robbery is. I grew up in Minnesota, and Northfield, Minnesota was about a 20-minute drive from my house, and that's where Jesse James robbed his last bank. And the citizens came out, and one of the guys, the bank's being robbed. Grab your guns.
Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.
Hey everybody, it's Wendy. In case you didn't know, David finally got off his butt and finished his book, True Crime and Consequences. The book is super educational and talks about the world of true crime and where it meets real investigations. It is perfect for everyone, from true crime fans like myself, to the true crime podcaster or YouTuber, to the amateur detective or web sleuth. And not to leave anyone out, you cops need to read this book too. True Crime and Consequences is available at murderpolicepodcast.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, well, pretty much anywhere you'd find a great book like this. So true crime fans, go get your copy today.